I used to think Sunday mornings were sacred. When I was a little girl, it meant waking up to the smell of cinnamon and peaches. Mom would already be in the kitchen, her hair tied back with that faded red bandana she always wore when she baked. She'd hum old Reba songs while pressing dough into the pie tin, letting me sprinkle sugar on top, even though I always got half of it on the counter. Back then, she was Susan Miller, my mom. Not yet Susan Roberts, the woman I can barely look in the eye now. Those Sunday mornings stopped the year I turned 16. That was when she met Mark. Mark Roberts came with his shirts starched, his car always waxed, and a voice too smooth to trust. He was the kind of man who shook your hand like he was closing a deal. I remember noticing how Mom's laugh changed around him, tighter, almost practiced. Mark had 2 kids of his own from a previous marriage. Kyle, 14, quiet and awkward, and Lily, 17, already curling her eyelashes and calling Susan Mom by the second weekend. I didn't mind the idea of family blending. I even tried. I set the table when they came over for dinner. I shared my room when we didn't have enough space. But it didn't take long to see who mattered more in this new family picture. Their photos started going up on the walls. My framed dance recital certificate disappeared. So did the crocheted blanket my grandma made for me. They were just things I told myself. But then I noticed how Mom's attention shifted. She asked Lily about prom, but forgot I had finals. She packed snacks for Kyle's soccer practice, but never brought anything to my choir concerts. I became something between a tenant and an inconvenience. That was when I started working evenings at the used bookstore downtown. It wasn't much, but it gave me space and a few extra dollars tucked into a jar beneath my bed. I told myself if I just made it through high school, I could breathe again. My grandparents, Mom's parents, were my one constant. They didn't say much, but I could tell they saw what was happening. After graduation, they sat me down at their old kitchen table and handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $22,000. It's not everything, Grandpa said, but it'll get you started. They had been saving since I was a toddler. College, apartment, freedom, whatever I needed to make a life of my own. I cried when I held that check. Not just because of the money, but because it was the first time in months I felt like someone still saw me. Combined with the $2,000 I'd scraped together from shelving books and sweeping floors, I had nearly 24 grand. Not a fortune, but enough to feel like I had a chance. I remember writing university application fees on one of the envelopes I used to organize the money. First month's rent on another. I had everything color-coded. It felt like I was building something that was finally mine. For a few weeks, I walked differently, straighter, lighter, like I wasn't waiting for anyone to notice me anymore. I had my own future now, and it fit in a shoebox under my bed. That didn't last long. It was a Tuesday when everything disappeared. I had just gotten home from volunteering at the animal shelter. There wasn't anything special about that afternoon, no loud fights, no slammed doors. Just quiet. I opened my laptop, clicked into my bank account, ready to schedule my first tuition payment, and I stared, not at a low balance, not at a weird transaction, at zero. Every cent. Gone. My fingers trembled as I refreshed the page 3 times like the numbers might suddenly correct themselves. But they didn't. And when I called the bank, I already knew what I was going to hear. "Yes, Ms. Miller," the teller said. "Your co-owner, Susan Roberts, withdrew the full amount yesterday afternoon." I didn't speak for a moment. I couldn't. My breath stayed stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. "Can you repeat that?" She did. Slowly, gently, like I was the one who had made the mistake. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just drove. Straight to the house I had stopped calling home. Mom was in the kitchen. Mark was nowhere to be seen, thank God. She looked surprised to see me but didn't flinch, didn't even pretend to be caught off guard. I know I said before she could offer small talk. "You took it." She didn't deny it. She didn't lie or make up some elaborate excuse. She just nodded like we were discussing borrowed flour. "I did," she said. "It was time you understood consequences." Her words didn't make sense at first, like puzzle pieces from the wrong box. Consequences for what? For how you treat this family, the way you disrespect Mark. You walk around like you're above everyone, like you're not part of this household. I remember the way my ears rang, like someone had smashed a dish behind me and the sound wouldn't leave. "That was my college fund," I said. "Grandma and Grandpa gave that to me. I worked for the rest." "It's all one family," she replied. "You're not the only one who needs help." I don't remember what I said after that. I think I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sheer absurdity of it cracked something open inside me. All I knew was that I had to leave. I packed what I could carry, some clothes, my folders, the shoebox that now felt painfully light, and called Grandpa from the front porch. He didn't ask why, just said, "We'll make up the guest room." That night I sat on the floor of their living room, still in my jacket, still wearing the same shoes. I didn't even have the energy to cry. I just stared at the empty box in front of me, wondering if maybe I'd made it all up. But I hadn't. The next morning, Grandpa handed me a cup of coffee and said, "We'll figure this out." And we did. Not quickly, not easily, but they gave me something more valuable than money. They gave me space. Over time, I started rebuilding, reapplying for aid, taking extra shifts. I didn't speak to Mom for months. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I didn't have the words left to explain what it felt like to be used. I wish I could say I was surprised by what she did. But if I'm honest, I'd seen it coming in pieces. The way she lit up when Lily walked into a room. How she kept photos of Kyle on the fridge, but none of me. The missed birthdays. The silent Christmas when I waited by the phone and got a text 2 days late. "Hope you're doing well. Love, Mom." No apology. No explanation. Just a line to cover the paper trail. Later, I learned that Mark's real estate business had been hit hard the year before. Quietly, they'd taken out a second mortgage. The house was slipping, and Kyle was due for braces, and Lily wanted to visit NYU. I was the only account they could touch without a lawyer. I wish that made it easier to swallow. It didn't. Because no matter how bad things get, there are lines you don't cross. And one of them is stealing your daughter's future and calling it discipline. I didn't hear from her for 5 years. Not on birthdays. Not on graduation. Not when I posted my first job acceptance on Facebook. She didn't like it. She didn't even see it. And honestly, that silence had become a kind of peace. By the time I was 23, I had rebuilt more than just a bank account. I had a studio apartment with a crooked ceiling fan, a job at the local community college's student support office, and a coffee maker that sputtered on the second cup. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No one called me a burden here. No one looked past me at dinner. I answered to no one but myself. Then, at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday, my phone buzzed. I squinted at the screen, thinking it was a wrong number. But the name made my heart seize. Mom. Just that. All caps. Still saved in my contacts from years ago. I opened the message. "Kyle needs $2,000 for his dorm. We're short. Can you help no high? No. How are you?" Not even a question mark. Just a direct line from her need to my supposed responsibility. It took me 2 hours to fall back asleep. The next morning I stared at the message again. I tried to imagine what would make a mother reach out like this after 5 years. Not with a hello, but with a bill. And not even my bill. Kyle, her stepson, my stranger. I hadn't spoken to him since he was 14, back when he used to unplug my phone charger to use it himself. Back when he once told me straight-faced that real kids live here. I wasn't sure if he even knew my middle name. Now, apparently, I was expected to sponsor his college dorm room. The second message came while I was brushing my teeth. "He needs a private room. Can't handle a roommate. It's an accommodation." That was the word she used, accommodation. Like this was a legally binding situation. Like she was filing a request with HR. I replied 2 words, "I'm sorry." And she replied 1, "Really, I didn't answer after that." But I could already feel it beginning, that old machinery winding up. The one where guilt wears a familiar perfume and silence becomes a weapon. That night, she called. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened, I heard her say, "Emily family doesn't turn its back when things get hard. You're doing well now. It's time you gave back." Gave back. As if my silence had been luxury. As if I owed her for the roof she once put over my head while quietly trading out my place for someone else. There was no mention of what she took. No word about the college fund, the shoebox, the shoelace budget I lived on for 2 years. Just a demand wrapped in the word family. I tried to remind myself she wasn't in charge of me anymore. But that voice, her voice carried weight it didn't deserve. It made me question myself in the way only someone who raised you can. Maybe I was doing okay. Maybe I could spare $2,000. Maybe Kyle really did need it. And then I stopped. Because that's how it starts. That's how it always starts. They push through the door with just one thing, and before you know it, they've set up camp in your peace. I blocked the number. Not out of anger, just clarity. I didn't block her for what she asked. I blocked her for how she asked. Like I was a resource. Like I was her second account. The following week, I got an email. Subject line, please reconsider. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd read that chapter before, and I already knew how it ended. It was a Thursday evening when she showed up. I'd just gotten off work keys in one hand, a bag of takeout in the other. The sun was low, coloring the sidewalk gold, and I was already thinking about the leftovers I'd stretch into lunch. Then I saw her standing outside my building like she'd never left. Hair done, arms crossed, paperwork in her hand. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't a dream or some strange déjà vu. I hadn't seen her face in years, and yet something about the way she stood like she was in control of a room she didn't own snapped everything back into place. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. She walked right up, her voice already dressed in resolve. We need to talk. I let the key hover at the door. If this is about money, you're not getting any. Her eyes flinched just barely. I didn't raise you to be so disrespectful. I smiled just a little. You didn't raise me much at all after Mark moved in. She inhaled stiffly like she was bracing for winter wind. Kyle needs help, Emily. He's struggling. We already signed the lease on a 2-bedroom near campus so he could have a quiet space. It's $1,000 a month. We thought you could assist with some of it just for the first semester. We, Mark, and Susan. Still the team. Still planning my role without ever asking if I'd signed up to play. I opened the door not to invite her in, but because I needed something solid between us. Why is that my problem? You're doing well now, she snapped. You could afford to help. I turned back. I could, but I won't. Her face twisted, part anger, part disbelief. Lily would help if it were you. I laughed. Lily doesn't even reply to my messages. And Kyle once told me I didn't belong in this family. So no, I don't think either of them would lift a finger. She stepped forward, trying to regain ground. You've always been difficult. We're just asking for support. Families support each other. I steadied my breath. The bag in my hand was getting heavy. You took my college fund. $24,000. You closed my bank account. You watched me pack my life in a weekend and move out without saying a word. And now you want to talk about family. Don't twist this into something about the past, she said, voice sharp. This is about now. Kyle needs, I needed too. I cut in, and you watched me go without. So don't come to me with your palms open and your memory closed. She fell silent. For the first time, she looked small. Not weak, just cornered. But only for a breath. Then she pulled out the line. She must have been rehearsing the whole drive here. You owe this family. That was it. The phrase that snapped the final thread. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I just said, no, Kyle owes you. Lily owes you. Maybe Mark owes you. But I don't. I paid for my own life after you stole the down payment on it. She looked at me like I'd spoken another language. This is what you've become, she said, voice brittle. Ungrateful. Cold. No, I said. I've become someone with boundaries. Someone who doesn't get manipulated by the word family. She tried to say something else, but I was already turning the key. Don't come here again, I told her before closing the door. I stood there in the quiet, my breath uneven, the paper bag crinkling in my hand. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't cried. But my hands were shaking. The envelope didn't have a return address. It was tucked between a grocery store coupon flyer and a utility bill. I almost threw it out, but the weight of it, the thickness of the paper, the formal seal on the back stopped me. I opened it on the kitchen counter with my thumb, not expecting much. Maybe another attempt from Mom to sound official. Maybe another guilt-soaked plea. What I didn't expect was a letter from a law office. Typed. Formatted. with my full name at the top and phrases like familial moral obligation and support expectation. They were claiming I had a duty to contribute financially to my brother's college housing expenses. Not just a request, not a suggestion, a claim. It wasn't a lawsuit. Not exactly, but it was worded to feel like one. I read it 3 times, the words turning colder with each pass. I half expected it to end with just kidding. Love, Mom. But it didn't. The letter cited something called a filial responsibility clause, apparently still active in a few U.S. states. According to the firm, because I was a family member with stable income, I had a moral obligation and possibly legal one to assist Kyle with housing support given his mental stress vulnerabilities. They described my brother like a charity case, like I was being asked to donate to a cause I barely knew. And they described me as financially secure, like I was sitting on piles of money. I was 23. I had a couch from Craigslist and a second-hand laptop. My idea of luxury was ordering Thai food once a month. But even if I'd had more, this wasn't about money. It was about control, about dragging me back into something I'd finally escaped. I called my grandfather that night. He listened as I read the letter aloud, barely interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "You worry about nothing. We'll take care of this." He made one phone call. To Tom Sellers, a friend from the Navy who now spent his retired days reading legal journals and feeding wild birds. Tom took one look at the letter and said, "This is pressure, not law. There's no court in Ohio that'll touch this. They're bluffing." That should have been a relief. And in a way, it was. But it also hurt in a deeper, more familiar place. Because this meant Mom had hired a lawyer not to protect Kyle, not to figure out a solution, but to come after me. She hadn't picked up the phone, hadn't tried again with words. She'd gone straight to intimidation, paper over apology, threat over conversation. And somehow that stung worse than anything she'd said at my door. I sat with that letter for a long time, left it unfolded on the table, let its corners curl slightly in the humidity. Then I wrote a note on the back in blue ink. "Here's what family looks like when you treat it like debt." I sealed it back in the envelope and mailed it to the return address listed on the bottom. I don't know if Mom ever saw it. I don't know if she opened it. I never heard from the law office again. But for the first time in a long time, I slept without waking at 3 a.m. and checking my phone. There was quiet again. No new calls, no demands, no games, just stillness. It was the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore, the kind that finally lets you breathe. For a while, I really believed that was the end. After the letter and my quiet reply, there was nothing. A week passed, then 2. I went to work, came home, slept through the night without checking my notifications like they might explode. I told myself it was over, not with celebration, but with a kind of resignation. The way you close a door you once hoped would stay open. Then late one Wednesday evening, a message came through. This time it was from Lily. The notification caught me off guard. I hadn't seen her name on my screen in years. I clicked it before I could stop myself. "Hey, I know things have been weird, but I was wondering if you could help a little with the dorm. Kyle really needs it. It's just money, and it's not like you can't afford it." I stared at it, read it again, then again. It's just money. That line sat in my chest like a stone. Not because of the money itself, but because of how effortlessly it dismissed everything. Like my silence hadn't been earned. Like the things that were taken from me never counted. Like all I needed was a little perspective and a generous spirit. I didn't respond. I didn't even start typing. There are moments when replying feels like permission, and I wasn't about to give it, because Lily, whatever kindness she might have carried once, had never asked how I was. Not after I left. Not after Mom cut me out of birthdays, holidays, family photos. She hadn't reached out when she heard about the job, hadn't sent a card when I graduated. She only messaged now because Kyle needed something, because I had something, and because somehow they still believed I owed it to them. A few days later, Aunt Carol texted, the only one in the family who'd ever stayed somewhat neutral. "Your mother says you've blocked her. She's very upset. She wants to talk." I could almost hear her voice in that message, the way she always tried to smooth things over even when things were jagged beyond repair. I replied with, "She's not upset. She's furious I said no." Carol, to her credit, didn't argue. She simply replied, "Maybe talk to her. Set boundaries." I almost laughed. The boundary was set. It had a moat and bricks and my name carved across the front gate. But I told her I'd think about it, not because I meant to, but because Carol didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. What struck me wasn't the persistence. I'd expected that. It was the calmness of it, like they truly believed that if they just wore me down slowly enough, I'd fold. There were no apologies, no acknowledgments, not even fake attempts at reconciliation, just requests. As though I were a utility. It wasn't rage anymore. Not like the early days. What I felt now was more dangerous than numbness of recognition. The clarity of knowing someone had shown you who they were over and over and you'd finally believed them. I deleted Lily's message, blocked her too, not out of spite, just for peace. Because in families like mine, peace is something you have to build yourself alone if necessary. And I was done waiting for them to make room for me. It wasn't dramatic the way it ended. No shouting match, no long goodbye, no final explosive message to tie it all off. It ended in the small ways when I stopped checking my phone every night before bed, when I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen, when their names stopped lighting up my screen and I didn't feel the urge to unblock them just to see if anything had changed. I had known it was over long before, but sometimes the heart takes longer to follow the facts. Still, I felt it for real one evening when I opened the drawer next to my bed and found the peach pie recipe. It was handwritten on an index card smudged with flour creased at the corners. I hadn't seen it in years, hadn't dared to look. It was in her handwriting. Back when I still called her Mom without flinching. Back when Sunday mornings meant music and cinnamon, not silence and numbers. I sat there for a long while just holding it, letting the paper tell its own story, not just of ingredients and oven times, but of something soft and real we used to have. It hurt to remember, but I didn't throw it away. I folded it carefully, slid it into a small wooden box I keep in the closet where I store things I don't need often but don't want to lose. Because not everything has to be forgiven to be kept. Some things we save just to prove they were once real. A week later, I signed up to volunteer at the Student Financial Aid Office on Saturdays, mostly first-gen students, a few single moms going back to school, one teenager who reminded me of myself, quiet, watchful, gripping a folder like it was armor. I didn't tell them my story. I just helped them protect theirs. I told them to never share bank accounts, to put their tuition money in separate savings, to know the difference between support and control. No one teaches you that when you're young. Especially not when the person hurting you says they love you. These days, I wake up to my own alarm in a home I pay for with work no one else can claim. I eat what I want, sleep when I need to, laugh when it comes. I'm not rich, I'm not perfect, but I am finally free. Sometimes I still think about calling her, not to reconnect, but to ask one last question. Do you ever miss me? But I don't, because I already know the answer wouldn't heal me. It would just reroute the wound. So I stay quiet, I stay gone. And that silence, that's mine now.